So last time we looked at an argument for moral relativism and for cultural relativism in particular. This time we're going to look at a counterargument. This argument comes from Paul Boghossian. There's a reading for this. It's relatively accessible because it's a newspaper article. You can find it on Canvas. So let's start by distinguishing relativism from a couple of other views, eliminativism and absolutism. Sometimes people are tempted to say or to think that relativism means there is no morality. So if the idea is, look, if you're going to be a relativist, you're really saying that there's no moral truths. Now, that might be right. In fact, that's going to be Boghossian's point. But that's not how relativists think of themselves. Relativists think of themselves as saying there are moral truths and there are moral falsehoods. They're just relative to cultures. So a relativist about morality does not think of herself as insisting that there are no moral truths or falsehoods. Instead, she thinks of herself as saying whether a moral claim is true or false depends on the speaker's perspective. If you're a cultural relativist, it depends on the culture from which the speaker comes. By contrast, eliminativists about morality think of themselves as saying there are no moral truths or falsehoods in the domain of morality. There may be truths or falsehoods about what people believe, so there may be facts about how people think about morality, but there are no truths about morality. So if you think morality is all nonsense, or you think that at least that moral claims can't be true or false, or can't have valence, can't be like appropriate or inappropriate, then you're an eliminativist in the relevant sense. And if you think that moral claims can be true or false, but only relative to a culture, then you're a cultural relativist. If, in contrast to both of those views, you think that moral claims can be true or false not relative to a culture, but absolutely, regardless of what culture you're from. So the very same moral truths that hold for me being from my culture can hold for someone else being from their culture, then you're an absolutist. So absolutism about morality says that there are moral truths and falsehoods, and that these moral truths and falsehoods aren't dependent on your perspective or anything else. They just hold across all of us. Now, suppose you decide that absolutism is wrong for whatever reason. And consequently, you think you have to pick between relativism and eliminativism. How should you pick between them? Well, Boghossian says this. He says you can pick relativism over eliminativism only if relativized morals are similar enough to absolute morals that we'd still want to say they're morals. So if you think that relativized morals are so unlike what we take morality to be, what we take morals to be, that it doesn't even make sense to call them morals anymore, then you would have to say, I can't be a relativist, I'll be an eliminativist. But if you think relativized morals are pretty similar to what we take morals to be, and there's no deep differences, then you can say, okay, I'll be a relativist. This raises the obvious question, are relativized morals similar enough to absolute morals? And Boghossian is going to say they're not. Okay, so here's his argument. He thinks morals are essentially prescriptive, not descriptive. So the idea is morals, it's part of their essence. It's part of what it is to be a moral, to tell you what you ought to do, to tell you what you should do, as opposed to just describing what you in fact do or what you think you should do. That is, morals are norms that tell us how we should act. They're not descriptions of how we do act or how we say we should act. So, for example, killing others for fun is wrong, that sentence, implies, the idea goes, that you shouldn't kill others for fun. I don't know why that's a 6. That is to say, if it's true that killing others for fun is wrong, then you shouldn't kill others for fun. So consider the following conversation. Maroon says, killing others for fun is wrong. And Green says, yeah, but should I do it? It looks like, says Boghossian, Green has not understood what wrong means. Green doesn't seem to understand moral language. Because if you say killing others for fun is wrong, you're implying that you should not do it. So if Green agrees and says, yeah, I agree that killing others for fun is wrong, then it makes no sense for Green to ask, but should I kill others for fun? Sorry, that should be an F there. So the point isn't this. The point is not that Green can't disagree with Maroon. Maroon says killing others for fun is wrong. Green can sensibly say, I understand what you're saying, but I disagree with you. I think killing others for fun is not wrong. That's okay. What's not okay, what's showing a misunderstanding of moral language is to say, yes, I agree with you that killing others for fun is wrong, but should I do it? Because the idea goes, it's part of the essence of this statement, killing others for fun is wrong. It's part of what it means that you should not do it. So if you agree that killing others for fun is wrong, you're agreeing I should not kill others for fun. So when Green says, I agree that killing others for fun is wrong, but should I do it? Green is showing that he actually doesn't understand the statement. Okay? That's what it means to say morals are essentially prescriptive, not descriptive. But if morals are relativized to cultures, they're mere descriptions. They're not prescriptive anymore. So take, for example, the claim that torturing others is always wrong. Remember, that became torturing others is always wrong according to my group. And torturing others is always wrong according to my group isn't a prescription anymore. It's just a description of a group. It says that this group endorses that claim. And you can see that play out down here. Suppose this person says torturing others is wrong according to my group. Well, this person from another group can sensibly ask, yeah, I agree torturing others is wrong according to your group, but should I ever torture someone? That's perfectly sensible. It's not showing a misunderstanding of the statement, torturing others is always wrong according to your group, to ask, but should you do it? So Green can agree that torturing others is always wrong according to this person's group, and still sensibly ask whether she should ever torture others. After all, she can sensibly wonder whether this group gets it right. So torturing others is wrong according to my group is just a description of my group. It's not a prescription for how everyone should act. So now we get Boghossian's argument. Morals are essentially prescriptive. It's part of what it is to be a moral, to be prescriptive. If morals are relativized to cultures, then they're not prescriptive. Therefore, morals can't be relativized to cultures. If you relativize to cultures, they're not morals anymore. They're just descriptions of cultures. If moral relativism is true, then morals can be relativized to cultures because moral relativism says morals are always relativized to cultures. Therefore, since morals can't be relativized to cultures, but moral relativism says they must be, moral relativism is false. That's Boghossian's argument against moral relativism. So we can think of it more loosely like this. Relativized morals just aren't similar enough to morals to call them morals anymore. Does that mean that they're unreal, like, say, witches are unreal? No. It means either morals are unreal, like witches, or morals are absolutes. So remember, we started off, let's say, we assume that absolutism is false, but merely demonstrating that relativism is incoherent doesn't give you some sort of moral skepticism or nihilism, the view that there are no morals. It gives you instead a disjunction. Either you have to accept moral absolutism or you have to accept moral eliminativism, moral nihilism. So put another way, if Boghossian's argument is sound, it shows that if moral absolutism is false, then moral eliminativism is true. Okay, so let's look back at the argument for moral relativism. It says some cultures' moral rules contradict others. In those cases, we have no way to decide which culture is correct. If those two premises are true, then either moral relativism is true or skepticism is true. We could substitute in for our purposes right now moral eliminativism because eliminativism implies skepticism. Therefore, either moral relativism is true or moral skepticism is true. Again, we can, for our purposes, stick in moral eliminativism. Moral skepticism is false. Moral eliminativism is false. Therefore, moral relativism is true. That was the initial argument. Now, Boghossian leaves us with a couple of options. We either have to accept moral skepticism, or moral eliminativism in particular, or we have to accept absolutism and deny some aspect of the argument that leads us to number 4, which tells us either relativism or skepticism. Because what Boghossian really shows is just this. He shows that relativism is off the table. So if you get as far as 4, then you're going to be stuck with skepticism or eliminativism. So how does Boghossian think we should react? Well, Boghossian says, look, I think we should deny 2. I think when cultures disagree, we do have a way to decide who's correct. So he accepts absolutism and says there are methods for deciding between competing moral claims. That's not the only route to trying to preserve absolutism. You can also deny 1 and say there really is no moral disagreement. You might think that that's implausible, but you might just want to distinguish, but the person who will deny one will distinguish between sort of superficial consequences of deep moral principles on the one hand and deep moral principles on the other hand. So a superficial consequence of a deep moral principle might be you should wear a hat if you're male whenever you go outside. But that's not a deep moral principle. A deep moral principle might be something like we should aim to maximize happiness, or we shouldn't do things that offend God, or something like that. And then we might have disagreement about the facts, like you might think that wearing a hat outside if you're male offends God, and I might not think that, or vice versa. But that would just be a different disagreement about the facts. We might agree about the deep moral principle that you shouldn't do anything to offend God. Or we might, disagree about that as a deep moral principle. We might think the real deep moral principle is something else. But what the advocate of denying one says is, really, for those deep moral principles, there isn't disagreement. You can also try and deny the inference. I think that's going to be a hard road to go, but you could do that in principle. Okay, we're going to stop this video there and continue next time by talking about the view that morals come from meaning.